Greetings, I'm Reuben Rainey, Professor Emeritus in the School of Architecture at the University of Virginia. It's my great pleasure to share with you this documentary featuring the work of Professor Mario de Valmarana. For 32 years before his retirement in 2004, Professor Valmarana shared with students and faculty his vast knowledge of Italian architecture, landscape architecture, architectural history, and urban design. He also founded the Vicenza and Venice programs, which remain a vital part of the school's curriculum, and he served as director of the preservation program. Professor Valmarana was born in Venice. He studied architecture and architectural history at the University of Venice and later at Columbia University. After 11 years in private practice, in 1972, he joined the architecture faculty at the University of Virginia, where he taught for the rest of his career. For me, it has been a great learning experience to have taught with Mario in Venice and Vicenza. For those of you who are alumni of these programs, I hope this documentary will evoke memories of great field trips, stimulating discussions, valuable architectural discoveries, delicious food, and above all, Mario's outstanding teaching. For those of you about to begin the Venice and Vicenza programs, I hope that this will serve as a useful introduction. And for those of you interested in Italian culture, I hope that this encounter with a great teacher will be both informative and engaging.
I really started to look back to my past life, and I rediscovered Venice. Venice is like I have been living in the Church of St. Mark's among Byzantine mosaics. You're aware of them, but you don't understand them. You don't understand the liturgy, you don't understand the iconography, you don't understand the technology of it. But you're aware they're there, but you don't make any effort to understand them. And when I came to this country, I started to realize what I left behind. And that is the reason why I promised myself to come back to Venice every year with a new knowledge about the city. My early childhood memories of Venice, we were living in Dorsoduro, which is one of the 6 neighbors, and we were very close to the Zattere, and we would see from our windows the masts of the ships coming and going, and that was one of our greatest entertainment. We would go, taken by the nurses, because at home we had the German Gauleiter who kept us in line. And she would take us to the Zattere to look at the ships arriving. And then after lunch we would have a walk. And we used to do walk with other friends. We in front, and the 3 or 4 or 5 Gauleiters behind us. And we would go and walk for a couple of hours. Certainly, we would like to go in places where there was more action by the local folks. And we like to go to the periphery of the city, within the city, because certainly there the life was different than in the life that we had where we lived. Not that we lived in a specific protected area, that is not the case of Venice. But certainly every neighborhood had its own characteristics, which were different from each neighbor. And therefore there was this stimulant of curiosity. The St. Mark's Square, for example, which is where I live nearby, or I live in still today, we were hardly going to St. Mark's Square, because St. Mark's Square was a sort of a monumental thing. And we only would go for special occasion, whether being these religious or civic occasion. We would go in the campi. In the campi, for example, were the place where we could once in a while exercise our physical being, running around, playing soccer and so forth. Sports, we didn't do very much sport in Venice because of the lack of facilities, as it is today. The only sport is rowing. To be able to go out and to expand physically into the lagoon was a great relief for us, and I believe for our parents. And it's when we started to learn to row. We had 2 boats, and we went out and row. Then we started to row with our friends. And then we had outing, all these boats, and we'll go in the islands. It's where really I discovered the islands, because then we would spend the nights out in the water. With my brother one night, we were taken by a huge big storm, and we couldn't go anywhere because we ran aground in the lagoon, in the Barena, and so the boat was completely filled up with water, and there was no way for us to let our parents know where we were. And in fact, my parents were very, very concerned that we would have been taken by the Germans, because at the time there was also the moment they would take the youth from the Germans. And finally, a vaporetto came by, and they stopped, and we shouted, and we let them know that we were here, if they could call and let my parents know. And in the meantime, then the water raised again, the high tide came back, and so slowly we came back home. But the lagoon was a part of adventure, but also a very pleasant sort of adventure. I remember how beautiful it was, darkness, because it was really light. Everything was glaring in the pitch black darkness. And we would take the Sandolo again and go alongside the Grand Canal, rowing and having fun till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And it wasn't a routine life, because every day in the street something else would happen in the microwave way. And therefore that was another dimension in that particular day. Now obviously, I was not aware of that then. I can see it now, how important the life on the street was. As I remember, the church was the catalyst point in the neighborhood. There was a major church and the secondary church, the chapel, and so forth. So you always somehow revert back to the notion of the church. When we used to live at the Dorsoduro, in the neighbors of Dorsoduro, that goes from the Salute all the way practically to the Frari. The Church of the Gesuati was our parish church. And I remember it was very important to go there for the religious services and so forth. Today, the church is the Church of San Luca. The church was not only a religious Catholic, but also it was a civic Catholic. The church represented both powers. The architecture school where I spent my years there was at my time was the most eminent architecture school probably in the entire Europe. We are not talking about America. We had the great fortune to be in contact with the great architects of the period, from Corbu to Frank Lloyd Wright, to Breuer, Neutra, all of them. And they all came through Venice. Alto, we had wonderful schnapps evenings with Alto that lasted until 3 o'clock in the morning. And he was sort of tipsy at the end of the experience. In fact, we called him Alticio. Alticio means be a little bit high on your elbow, in drinking. So it was, it was Mr. Alticio, we used to call him. Usually, the kind of projects that we had in the studio were related mostly on problems with the city, with Venice. Not so much infills, but really to analyze, for example, new constructions at the Lido, the transportation, for example, improvement in the lagoon. Those were the projects. Obviously, the transportation in the lagoon was then correlated with architectural elements. One of the early projects was thinking about the future of the Arsenale, which is an issue topic that still is on the plate today. So we had a variety of good but local projects. We would never go and build a house in Vienna as we do it sometimes today. To be aware and to be physically present with the problem on that particular spot. So the school gave at least me an immense sense of auto-criticism, to teach how to really to look through a critical channel the elements of culture. I was longing to come to this country to learn about modern architecture, because our school teacher, our professor, Bruno Zevi, was very, very strong in that field. And so I decided, against my father and mother, my parents' wishes, to come to this country. And I left Venice by boat, and we landed in Baltimore at Sparrows Point at the Bethlehem Steel Company, and then I took a train from there to New York. And I had a trunk. I almost felt like to be really an immigrant, I had a trunk. I didn't know what to pay for the taxis, but anyhow, I took this taxi and still remember today coming out from the underground of the Pennsylvania station, which now doesn't exist, unfortunately, any longer. I looked in the back window and I saw the skyscraper, and I really started to cry, because I told myself, boy, this is really liberation. Liberation from, not from, I would say, from oppression and so forth. It's really that I was a little bit revolting against the very strict rules that we, brothers and sisters, were subject in the family. And I found myself free to do now things that I could really enjoy and that I could feel that would be useful for my, forthcoming professional life. And I went at Columbia, and then my life in America started. My experience in New York has been really fundamental for me to change my entire attitude toward A, architecture, B, life in general, and C, for all my relationship to the past life in Venice, or being Italian, let's put it this way, being Italian and Venetian in particular. You know, when I was at Columbia, I follow classes of Whitcover. Now, when Whitcover started to talk about the architecture in Venice, the Renaissance, and also the architecture of Palladio and so forth, Whitcover meant something to me because he helped me to really to start to look at things a completely different way. He opened really my eyes about the architecture of Venice, the architecture of Palladio, and it made me aware of the things that I took it for granted when I was living in Venice. And it really was a rediscovery of the city, as it was the rediscovery of Palladio. And that is and I got so much out of it that I really started by myself to look back into not only the physical being of the city, but also the history of the city. Mind you, in Venice, I never read one book about the history of Venice, because the history was right there, ready for you. Now, by reading the history of Venice, I could start now to compare not only history of other countries, other governments, but also to juxtapose history with then the artifacts that make that city. And that for me was really a great experience that taught me also to look at other cities in the same way. And that is the reason why I'm cherished the opportunity that I had to take the students for 27, 28 years back to Venice, but not only to look at Venice per se, but really to take Venice as a model to look at cities and at places in the same way as we were looking at Venice. The lesson that Venice can give to the contemporary architects and scholars is really the human dimension. The human dimension, not the physical, really the psychological human dimension. Why Venice has no crime? Because the life in Venice is all organized around certain dimensional elements that you are an integral part of it. You don't have stretched limos in Venice that make other people angry because you have the money and I don't have the money. The social interaction, the so-called poor, but in Venice we don't have poor because we all live practically in the same way. Yes, one lives in a palazzo, one lives in una casa, architettura minore, a vernacular house. But the life per se is all the same. But you know, in Venice, life was always a continuum, and a continuum really in its microsystem, because in another city, your life is divided by things that you do. Because if you have to go to a certain distance, you have to take a car, you have to take a tram and so forth. In Venice, you don't have to do that. So it's always a continuum. It's like a Vivaldian music. You have certain instruments to move in, but the tonality is always the same. If you don't take the evaporator, but you walk alongside the water, so you're almost as you would be in evaporator. And if you are in evaporator, you go underneath the bridges, you see the palaces, you see this and that, and you talk to the people standing near you as they would be in a campo where the market is and so forth. So the evaporator is the extension, and I loved that when I was a child, because I loved also this sort of ballet that the attendants would do to throw the ropes on the stops, and those are the things that once I grew up, I understood how important they were to be able to witness these actions by others, and the actions that are part of your daily life. Nothing changes in Venice, really. I think Venice only changes when, when it's early morning to back to sundown. It's a city that has no time, has no speed. You can go or ignore everybody on the street, or you can just stand in one point, in one given place, and spend all your day talking to people. See? You greet people on the street, not knowing who they are. Buongiorno, buongiorno, and that's it. You don't know who they are. It's because this is wonderful melange. So I don't see great differences when I was younger and what it is today. The churches are the same, the campi are the same bar. I remember to get an ice cream once every blue moon. Is still there, the cafes are there, the stone is there, the water wells are there. So there is no change. It's timeless. Venice has a fantastic resiliency. We are talking about the Acqua Alta. The Acqua Alta has always existed. It becomes today more of a tourist attraction than a real problem. I don't think that those interventions like the Moses and so forth are going to help a bit. First of all, they will never be built. And secondly, if they build them, it's going to take so long that by the time that they are built, they are not useful any longer. One of the most fundamental design issues about Venice is how you design or you make a city based on its natural condition. You know, Venice was built on islands. The islands have been respected. That is the reason why you have canals, bridges, campi, because you start from the edge of the island, the little island, and you move inward. Is where the leftover space is present, and there you have a campo. So the campo is a direct resultant from the make of that island. And that is something that you can learn very, very clearly because it's there. The metamorphosis of the place between natural condition and then an artificial condition. And in Venice, there is no difference between what is an artifact and what is nature. because the stone in Venice are natural elements which have been carved by man. But also the lagoon is a natural element that has been tampered by man for all this century. So what is really the nature in Venice? It's a question that one has to raise and be able to not to have answers, but at least to be aware. The Venice is always this temptation to touch things, to touch wood, to touch the stone, to touch the iron. It's really because there is a sort of an osmosis between you being there and material that then talks back to you. The sounds, the smell, you know, the senses, and all these things here in Venice you can feel and you can appreciate because of this overlapping between the hard surface and the soft surface, the water and the city per se, and how wonderful these two surfaces really melt together. When I look back with a conscience that I have today, I think that everything that I lived in Venice during the period was, everything was to be liked and not to dislike. We loved the people. Obviously, there were always beautiful things to look at. And also, and although we were not conscious about it, but subconsciously, obviously, it must have grown in me. I think for every Venetian should leave Venice to understand the city really what it is. Cousin of mine is Girolamo Marcello, member of one of the great families of Venice, 3 doges and so forth. He probably left Venice 5 times in his lifetime. He's my age, because he says there is no reason to go out of Venice because we have everything in Venice. I say, no, you can't say that, because if you go out of Venice, then you will find out how many more things that you have in Venice that you are not aware of. The Venice is really a major, big museum. The city, the streets, the campi, the indoors are all part of a major museum system. I feel today that Venice can teach a great lesson how one should live in an urban system.
Venezia. Spiega tutta la roba del mestiere di Agasaia.
E poi parliamo anche, we are leaving the Grand Canal and we enter in one of the rii of Venice. It's say giusto. The Rio is a natural waterway that separates the islands of Venice. Venice was built on 143 islands, all separated from each other by these rii. The Rio, therefore, is a natural element and it's very important for the livelihood of the city. Now you see, for example, here how the daily garbage is picked up, and it can only be done thanks of the existence of the Rio. The major transportation and the commerce activities is done in the water, and the Calle is secondary to the Rio. We always use the Calle for daily connections, but actually the Rio is, as I say, is the livelihood of the city. It's going to be a very, very interesting experience, which is not done quite often. What we're going to see today, there are the various conditions alongside the Rios. The differences between the Rio and the Calle is that the impact of the building onto the grounds, on the horizontal ground. On my left, we look a very straight line between building and the ground. But when we look instead how the building hits the water, there is always a variation of the line. There's never a straight line. There is a life on its own. We have a sort of a traffic grid here. All different type of boats. We have our pickup boat, the commercial boats on your right over there. Now we go, for example, in front of us we see a wonderful palazzo, Palazzo Loredan. Remember that the Rios were the most important vector and transportation thing. This is what happens in Venice with the acqua alta, or high tide as we have it right now. It's very difficult to go through the Giorno. In the Ri, you can hear some of the most funny and sometimes four letters words, because the barcaioli are very moody. And you have to have a tremendous patience. In the back, you see Giorgio, our boatman. He's a good friend. He's the one that takes us around now, and he's an expert driver. You can see that they don't hit anything. Now we are leaving the main road, and we go to a much quieter Rio. This is sort of a very private little place, and many of these Rios are these private, almost as small private alleys in a huge park. Now you see how quiet everything it is. We see the bridges, we see the roll of the bridges. The bridges are never put sort of by accident in places. They're really put in a very, very precise location. We see in the Rio really the private life of Venice. On the Calles and on the Grand Canal is the official the important aspect of life. But in the Rio, we see laundry hanging around, wonderful flower pots, and all sort of personal, intimate vocabulary. So also we see how we maintain some of the building. There is a sort of framework. This is the way on the right way that we fix doors. It's interesting also to notice how the relationship between Rio and Fondamenta is done. The different way to step out of the boat into the hard land. And they're really, some of them, they're good design exercises. He has a very difficult time to maneuver now.
Get out?
No, no. If you want to have some good ice creams, here it is on your right, left. There is an ice cream transportation. Buongiorno. Buongiorno. On your right, we have the old warehouses for the grain, the granaries, which were very important. They are built like fortresses. Very soon we're going out now into the Grand Canal again. On the right there, the big Palazzo Vendramin Calergi, one of also from Mauro Codussi, the famous architect, and which Richard Wagner died there, thank God. Now, like in San Giovanni e Paolo, here people almost like actors, props. They go on in front of a stage, and the stage this time is Hotel La Forcola. Here we have a material depot on our right. See, it's a sort of lows. We have our own lows around here. And on the right, this big wall is part of the old foundries. When the foundries were transported to the Arsenale in the 13th century, is when where the ghetto was built. And we are in the ghetto area now. The OE is the sign for approaching to a crossroad. And you say premi if you push to the left, or stai when you push to the right.
Ramia secula secularum, amen. Dominus vobiscum et cum spirito tuo, sursum corda bemus a Dominus, gratias agamus Dominus.
Beh, non. Beh, io dico sì. Non sapevo che avesse questa bella coperta. Mai visto? Another aspect of the sea in the Rios, you see all this greenery popping up from the various little courtyards. And the courtyards are the leftovers land in the back, usually in the back of the buildings. Now here, this is a little boat yard, And now you're going to see what they're doing. They're going to lift a boat there. No, no, basta, basta, è meglio il tempo perché poi gira.
Dovrei portarlo in cantiere anche a me.
Ah sì? Per la barba.
Barba è tutto,
Ah sì?
passato.
E quanti anni gara sta barca?
Ma avevo 25.
25? Bene.
Ma lo teniamo bene, ma lo in seconda massa.
Ah sì? Tenivo molto bene, sì.
Avevo dato tutta la resina sotto.
Ho visto il soffiol che la uso ogni tanto, no? Domenica.
Fare spese.
Domenica si andava.
Domenica va qui in fiori a fare un giro al can.
Ah, ecco, ho visto il cane. In front of us we have one of the great early Gothic churches of Venice. It's called La Madonna dell'Orto. It's part of the monastic series of churches alongside the eastern part of the city, which originally was all marshland. We have the church, and then in front of us on the left is the scuola, and that is the scuola, the guild hall for learning the arts and crafts of a particular type. Look how beautiful the church is, the very subdued decoration. The stonework is not done practically by Venetians, but it was done by imported craftsmen, and usually they came from the north, especially from England. In fact, we recognize in the details of the traceries very much some of the qualities that we find in religious buildings in England. On the right-hand side, we have a famous palazzo, Palazzo del Mercante, so-called, and it's a merchant. They used to do business in the Orient. You see the camels. Look at that man, look at that. That is what you do, your maintenance work, public maintenance work. Man in the water. And here's a garbage truck coming by, the garbage boat. In the Ri, you have some of the great palaces, like the one on the left here. Is one Palazzo Contarini, it's called, which rivals some of the palaces on the Grand Canal. Now, if we look at that bridge in front of us, we have on top of the keystone is made of usually three coat of arms. All the coat of arms are of the families that spent their money to build that particular bridge. We see how nice and quiet it is in this part of the world of Venice. We are away of all that messy condition and situation that we have in St. Mark's Square, for example. And this is the true Venice. Look at here on the left-hand side, a wonderful portal of one of the old retirement home for destitute people. And in front of us, on the left-hand side, is the so-called the Church of the Misericordia, sort of welfare type of church, again for the destitute people. And on the right-hand side, behind the loggia, there was supposed to be a big garden for a Palazzo Venier on the other side of the place, but the garden somehow has never been realized. On the left-hand side is one of the high school licei in Venice, Liceo Foscarini. They go and learn aspect of art, of urbanism, or whatever it is, which is part of the general education in the high school level. They go and study it from the real thing. Now, if we look at the facades of these buildings, and it's very, very nice to be so close to them, we see at a certain moment certain details, and these are the details of the treatment. For example, the iron with stone, stone with brick, brick and iron, which are the part of that micro language that Scarpa took on and it transformed it into a modern architectural motif. See, Giorgio said this is a little rain for the salad. It's a sprinkle to help the salad grow. It's the only church is really the side of canal is born from the water. You see, there is no foundation almost. It's almost like it's not a heavy building, but it's a very light one. It can, as I say, float. We enter into the Grand Canal at the Rialto area. In front of us we have the judiciary buildings. On the left is the Rialto Bridge, and on the right is the big central market. The vegetable market, the fruit market, and the fish market behind the red curtains. But today we don't have the fish market because the fish is not fished on Saturdays and Sundays, so on Monday we don't have fresh stuff. Tomorrow, on Tuesday, is going to be absolutely filled with people and with activities. Even for me, it's a constant revelation going around like this. The best thing is really going around Venice is going by the Rio. I've been privileged to grow up with this view of the Grand Canal, and time and time again I'm asking myself what I've learned from all of it. Now what is facing us today are almost 800 years of history of the city. 800 years of intense history, political, social, and cultural. And this is a characteristic of Venice itself. When we think that this city has been founded in 804, and we still see the remnants, hands-on remnants of this long period of evolution. These buildings are all playing I would say, a choir with themselves. They're all different from each other, but they are constantly knit together in a sense of harmony, of color, and of the essential elements that made the building an integral part of the environment. It is remarkable that every time I look at these structures, I always discover something new. There are architectural details, there are colors, there is light, there's fantastic light that changes constantly. Not only the texture of the sky and the texture of the water, and obviously there is also sound. Yes, sound, because I think the sound is one of the most important things for our senses. Sound gives us a spatial dimension. And we have sounds here of both men's voices, of the evaporators, of engines, of the seagulls, of the bells. And obviously, these sounds then reverberates on the facades of the buildings. I always think if I design something, that sound must be a background in our thinking of what we are designing, because a deaf building is a no building. However, having said that, I think that we can learn tremendously from this constant image in front of us. Venice is a very, very peculiar place, built on 100 plus islands, knit together by hundreds of bridges, each one of which has its own voice. And this sort of harmony that permeates the city gives the city its particular beauty and its particular mystique. This mystique that has overtone of triumphal gestures, but also a great deal of simplicity, of modesty, and down-to-earth common sense. What we are faced here with are 800 years of history, starting with the building on the right. Those two buildings date back around the early 14th century, and they are of Byzantine tradition. Obviously, we have some alteration done through the subsequent centuries, but we still see the marks of that style of that period of, I say, late 13th, early 14th century. Next to it, it's another very old building. It looks actually 19th century, but it's not. It has been sort of cleaned up, but it dates basically with the same like the other two next to it. And the big palace here is Ca' Bernardo, and that dates 1422. And it's a typical Venetian Gothic with beautiful, delicate traceries made of stone. And this is really the so-called Venetian style, which then is going to be part of the revivals in the late 19th, early 20th century. In front of us is a 17th century building, Palazzo Venier. Now it's for public use, and it's very simple in its character. You have seen that all the style now has been cleaned up, and we enter into a sort of more of revival, Renaissance, or into the Enlightenment period. Next to it, the small palace is one of the jewels of Renaissance architecture, done by Mauro Codussi. It's Palazzo Grimani, and it dates 1520. And it's absolutely a jewel in its own proportions, in the details. We still see there some gesture They remind us of Byzantine decoration, like the colorful marble inserted like pieces of diamonds into the surface of the stone cladded facade. And finally, on the left-hand side, the orange building, that is the 1910 structure. Now we got into a complete revival period after the unification of Italy in 1870. Every major town has rejuvenated its look, and obviously the Venetian style has been the essence of this rejuvenation. Now, if we look further past the canal, we see a classical example of a palace. It should have been the Palazzo Gradenigo, but it's never been finished. And the terrace there is just a leftover of what should have been the two-thirds of the palace, immense, huge, big structure. The palace next door, the Pink Palace, is Palazzo Pisani Moretta, one of the great palaces with fantastic frescoes inside by Tiepolo, and still privately owned, and it has that jewelry type of system in the center, that tracery sort of glued to the facade to make the building as light as possible. This is Campo San Giovanni e Paolo, one of the most important campi in Venice. Certainly, after St. Mark's, the most prestigious, if we can say, because of three of the great monuments in town. The Scuola Grande di San Marco, the Church of San Giovanni e Paolo, and the monument to Bartolomeo Colleoni. The Scuola Grande di San Marco was built around 1486, designed by Mauro Codussi, who was the recognized first Renaissance in Venice. The Church of San Giovanni e Paolo was built in the 13th century by the Mendicant Order of the Dominicans, and finally the Bartolomeo Colleoni monument was done by Andrea Verrocchio, the great teacher of Leonardo. Unlike the buildings around Venice, especially in the Grand Canals, the important buildings, which they all have the same voice and they sing in a sort of a choir. Here we can notice that these three buildings try to overshadow each one against the other. The Scuola Grande di San Marco, with its glaring white marble, which hold the most wonderful remnants of the Byzantine art, and also it brings to the fore the early Renaissance motifs. But everything is done in the most subtle way. What is important is the light and the impact of the atmosphere around it. It seems like almost that the entire facade is I would say, a fiction. is a stage setting. We look at the perspective, the four perspective elements at the base of that facade, which dematerialize the entire rest of the building. And we look at the people entering and exiting the building, and they look like subconsciously actors, while we consciously are the spectators. It is really all fiction, because fiction is an integral part of the image of Venice. On the other hand, next to it, at 90 degrees angle, attached to the Scuola Grande di San Marco, we have the big church of San Giovanni e Paolo. That is not fiction. That is really an immense building set in that place to make sure that the power of the church and the power of the orders is recognized and present in the public eye. In fact, also from a spatial point of view, its immense volume reminds us somehow the next door galleys of the Venetian Republic. Its fantastic engineering is reminiscent to the fantastic engineering of naval tradition. So all these three buildings, they are not fighting against each other, but certainly they are not in harmony with each other. What makes it, however, spatially as a uniform element is the great monument to Corleone. This monument is placed in a very crucial place, which he he catalyzed the entire space around it, and which then it melts the form of the two buildings in a wholeness that makes then the space so harmonious. One of the most important things that we have to remember that the Campo San Giovanni e Paolo is in an L shape, and it's the only campo of this type of form. Usually the campo in Venice are centralized, they have a center, while here we have the campo that creates some fantastic vanishing perspective on the Rio on one side and along the Calle on the other side. And that we have to recognize that this campo, which is not, thank God, visited as Piazza San Marco, is one of the campos that have been also immortalized by Canaletto. Here we are in the beautiful island of San Giorgio, where we witness lots of different stages in contrast to what we have seen at San Giovanni e Paolo. These stages are of different quality and meaning. Obviously, we have the stage of the Church of San Giorgio, which is the religious stage. Then we have the cloisters for the use of the monastery, but acting more as piazzas than sacred places. And finally, water, this vast public realm that ties together the urban habitat and this to the cosmos. Sky and lagoon are as a whole in which Venice floats as its microsome. From whichever side we look at the island, from San Marco or from the Lido, from the Punta della Dogana or from a boat in the lagoon, the island offers an incomparable harmonious composition of those elements that are peculiar of the urban and contextual landscape of Venice. Long brick walls bordering the island covered with vegetation, simple building volumes counterpointed by the merged campanile. The cliffed white facade of the church crushing upon the horizontal platform, which barely emerges from the water. The almost spontaneous and natural beauty of these elements acquired in San Giorgio an exceptional precision and resonance because of Palladio's signature. He worked at it for 20 years, from 1560 to his death, and our understanding of San Giorgio gives us a rare occasion to absorb the global architectonic, ideological, practical, and political knowledge of Palladios. Palladio not only resolves the complex architectural programs, he knows how to satisfy the ever-present issue between what constitutes sacrality and what constitutes profane. We need to remember that in Venice the separation of church and state was a fundamental constitutional aspect of the Venetian political structure. In the 14 and 1500s, Venice needed politically to appease the role of the church as a temporal power, but certainly not to follow its dictate. Hence, the need to express these conditions through the arts, at that time the most powerful and effective media expression. Once again, as in the case of San Giovanni e Paolo, there is no alternative to it. It is up to us to choose between the two. Let us analyze this point. Firstly, the facade of the church is to be seen from afar in its total context, form, place, in the major urban structure of the vast water space in front of it. It is the facade of the church. But once we are closed and under it, we lose entirely the notion of church. We are confronted by a mass of oversized architectural forms, materials, and an overwhelming power. The sacred subject has vanished. We find it again once we enter the building, and not until we reach the major altar. This is my point. The sacred altar, with its copper heart, earth, carried by the four evangelists, on top of which stands the Redeemer, is in direct and axial relationship with the profane altar of the Punta della Dogana, with its own gilded earth supported by three continents, Europe, Africa, Asia, on top of which stands a pivoted fortune, which represents Venice, sailing with the favorable winds wherever she founds good commerce. We are in the Dorsoduro neighborhood, where I was born many years ago. Dorsoduro, as we call it, DD, means hard back, because it's one of the highest points of the city, and it never goes underwater except very few little places. It is a special place, Dorsoduro. I'm extremely fond of it. I was raised in this area until 1939, when we moved to the present location on the Grand Canal. Here I went to school from K and through architecture. Here in Dorsoduro we have some of the great Venetian institutions, meaning the Accademia, the Guggenheim, the Palazzo Rezzonico, 2 universities, in addition to many art galleries, antique stores, and a very thriving artist colony. I have lots of friends in Dorsoduro, and I like more this place than the place that I'm living today. Dorsoduro has one of the most beautiful views, both on the Grand Canal. If we look at from the Accademia Bridge near the Dorsoduro, we see the most beautiful sweeping views on the Grand Canal, all the way down to the Salute and to the Bacini San Marco. And while we are on the Zatteri, we can see the Giudecca across the channel. Dorsoduro is also wonderful because it's not on the beaten track of the tourist. While the center of the city is infested by thousands of tourists every day, which has changed the character of that area. Here in Dorsoduro, because of a lack of the tourists, we have maintained, or it has been maintained, a local character, which we can still detect it today. Children coming and play around here. Is mostly a residential place rather than commercial. The big commercial enterprises are in the center of the city. When we look around here, we see, for example, the Church of the Redentore by Palladio, the Mulino Stucchi at the other end, which is a 19th century Austrian construction. We have other wonderful example of architecture, but what I'm interested also about Dorsoduro, because it's the only place in Venice that has dared to propose some contemporary architecture. It is, in my opinion, it's of paramount importance to try to introduce this contemporary architecture, because although we maintain the structure of the Venetian fabric, we need to have a completely new expression in the local architectural language. The daily life in Dorsoduro, as I said before, continues in the old tradition. Is a playground for all ages. I feel very comfortable around here. I almost, my memory goes back to the early years, and when I look at the church of the Gesuati, I remember that was our parish church, and every Sunday we had to go to church there. So Dorsoduro is a place, in my opinion, that gives you contentment, tranquility, and overall a certain serenity.